Well, hopefully you guys are following along with today being PJ Sunday. You can see I got my glow in the dark Spider-Man shirt, and I also have my lovely Superman pajama bottoms, which I guess means I now owe DC and Marvel a bit of licensing fees. Hey, welcome to another Sunday Epic Online. Now, way before we ever showed up at CV Church, Melissa and I got married. We've been married almost 12 years now. It's quite a long time, quite amount of great years behind us. But when we first got engaged, we decided that we were going to be very creative with sharing to everyone our engagement. And so we got a video camera and we started videotaping different ways that people would think that we got engaged. And so one of the first times I ever used a green screen effect, and it was nothing like this one here, and this one here is still quite lacking, but that's okay. So we shot this one, and it was supposed to be all these like artsy fartsy kind of romanticized in Melissa's head way that I proposed to her on the Titanic and in front of the Eiffel Tower and all of that kind of stuff. And then my story was Melissa's brother took me into a room and put a gun to my head and basically said, "Hey, you have to marry my sister. She's desperate. We're desperate to get rid of her. Please take her." And then last but not least, we shot a goofy one where we said it was more of just a spur of the moment, just kind of, will you marry me type thing. And we shot it in a McDonald's. And it's really funny because when you watch the video, you see us just kind of talking. I'm like, will you do it? And she's like, do what? And I was like, get married to me. She's like, oh, like, aren't you supposed to propose? And I was like, I'm not the typical kind of guy. And we're shooting all of this, and we have to hide the video camera because McDonald's didn't completely know that we were doing this. And what's funny is right after we hit the end of the record of this little session that we were taping, there was a worker at McDonald's that peeked into the room, and she said, "Oh my goodness, honey, I hope you did not say yes to him asking you that." And Melissa's like, well, "What do you mean?" She goes, "If he proposed to you in McDonald's, you need to drop his butt." This lady watched it and she saw what we were doing, and she thought I was honestly proposing to Melissa in the middle of a McDonald's, just kind of going, "Will you marry me?" And it was funny because we then had to explain to the lady, but in that moment, that lady's like, he does not deserve you if this is how he's going to propose to you. You deserve a lot better than the way that he's treating you. We have been starting to talk about the book of Malachi. And the book of Malachi is this very interesting book because like a lot of the prophets in the Bible, it's all about directing people back to God and to deal with some of the things that they're dealing with. And the first people that the book of Malachi is written for is the priests, and it's God addressing how the priests have been treating him. And then it goes to the rest of the people and how they have been treating God, or rather the lack of how they've been treating God. We talked about last week how they just kind of started putting God on the back burner. He wasn't important to them anymore. And God started talking to them, and he's like, seriously, like, do I not matter to you? Now, as we continue in the book of Malachi, he goes from talking about that to talking about how they treat him with their worship. And basically he says, hey, listen, the way you worship me, the way you're treating me when it comes to worship, it is lacking. I deserve so much more, and yet this is how you're treating me. In fact, in Malachi 1, starting in verse 11, it says this: I am honored all over the world, and there are people who know how to worship me all over the world, who honor me by bringing their best to me. They're saying it everywhere. God is great, this God of the angel armies. All except you. I mean, imagine that. You're hearing this and you're like, okay, yeah, everyone's worshiping our God. Our God is great. And then they're like, except for you. You people specifically. Uh-oh, that's not good. Instead of honoring me, you profane me. You profane me when you say worship is not important and what we bring to worship is of no account. And when you say I'm bored, this doesn't do anything for me. You act so superior, sticking your nose in the air. Act superior to me, God of the angel armies. You know it's pretty bad when God says, hey, you're acting stuck up. You're acting like you're better than me, better than God. And when you do offer something to me, it's a hand-me-down or broken or useless. Do you think I'm going to accept it? This is God speaking to you. And while he wrote that to the people way back then, I want to ask ourselves that question as we're going through the book of Malachi, as we start talking about worship today. I wonder if some of those same things could be said to us about the way that we worship God. I wonder if God was kind of sitting there and if people on the outside see our worship of God and the way that we worship him personally and deep down in our hearts, and they kind of see it as that whole McDonald's setup, where they see us and we say that we have this relationship with God and we love God and he has done so much for us, and yet it looks like we're in the middle of McDonald's and this big moment is just happening off to the side, when God deserves so much more and we're giving him so much less. See, worship is about connecting and focusing on God. I mean, that's really what worship breaks down to. About really focusing on him, removing all of those distractions and focusing on God and who he is, and really lifting him up, praising him, giving him what he deserves. I know a lot of times we have grown up with this mentality that worship means I'm going to sing some songs to God, and that is what worship is. I'm going to raise my hand a little bit as I'm singing these songs, and that is truly worshiping God. But in essence, it is an action, it is a choice, a decision we are making to focus on God and to lift him up in some way, in somehow. Today, I want to really briefly talk to you about what worship isn't. And through that, we can start looking and saying, okay, God, am I really giving you my best? Am I really worshiping you with everything that I have? It's kind of the reason why I did pajamas today, because a lot of times we see church and we see all these people dressed up. I mean, how weird would that be if I came in on a Sunday morning and I was just wearing like a pair of, scrappy pajama pants and, a ripped up shirt? People would be like, huh? I'm sure Pastor Scott would be like, hey, Josh, we need to talk about your dress code. Are we giving God our best with our worship? Or are we just giving him our scraps? The first thing we have to know when it comes to worship is that worship is more than a show. In those verses we read earlier, it says this: worship is not important, and what we bring to worship is of no account. This is what God was saying to them. He was saying, you treat worship as it's not important, and you don't care what you're bringing to worship. You're, in essence, putting on a show. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've been to some churches or to some worship settings where the venue was amazing, and being around all of these other people lifting up God and crying out to him and worshiping him on our hands and knees, on our faces to the ground, whatever it is, really worshiping God, it is great. And sometimes being around other people, it just spurs us forward into worshiping him. But if that's what is required for us to really worship God, then we're missing it. If I can only worship God when it comes to being on the stage or being in front of a stage where I see all of these people with these great instruments looking nice and all of the lights perfectly, if that is the only way that I can worship God, then in essence, worship is about a show and not really about God. I mean, I've talked to people before and I've been around people before that they're like, yeah, but when they do this song, I just don't like it, and I just really can't engage God. It just ruins the whole worship experience for me. When they have these lights, or when they don't have these lights, or when the drums are too loud, or when and we set up all these things when the pitch is perfect or it's not perfect, and we put all of these limitations on worship. And if we don't check off all of those boxes, then we're not going to have a really good worship session. Then guess what? If that is the way that we view it, then worship is more about a show than what's really going on in here. See, that was part of the reason why God was speaking to the priests and the people. He was saying, you're doing all these things that are wrong, but on top of that, it is what is going on inside of your heart. You're not even trying to give me your best. You're just doing a lazy job of it. And if our heart is all about, I'm not feeling the big booms or hearing all the synthesized effects and everything like that, so I can't fully worship, then it's really not about our heart. It's about the show that is going on around us. Can I tell you, I have had amazing worship experiences where I just connected with God, where I just felt like I was before Him, worshiping Him and lifting Him up when I was in crowded venues, when I was at winter and summer camps, when I was at my youth group and we were playing it on YouTube videos and it was pitch black and no one could see what anyone else was doing and it was just you and God. When I was in my room and just had a song playing or just started talking to God. See, it shouldn't be about the venue and it shouldn't be about the show. It should be about the heart behind it. We should be able to engage God and worship more than just a Sunday morning church or more than just a summer camp or a winter camp, but our worship should be happening continuously. Another thing that worship isn't is worship is more than just a feeling. Continuing in the verse, he says, and when you say I'm bored, this doesn't do anything for me. Let's be honest, I've said that before in worship times. I know it is really bad, but there are times I've been like, seriously, we're doing this song again? Or seriously, I just can't relate to this song. And there have been plenty of times that God's like, hey, Josh, at that point, you're saying it's more about you than it is about me. But I'm sure we've been there before. Where we say that I'm not experiencing it, I'm not feeling it. Oftentimes I have found that the times I don't want to go to church is the times that I really need to be there because God has something for me. The times that I really don't feel like worshiping God are the times that when I really start to press in and say, okay, God, I don't feel like this. I don't like the song. I don't like the singer. I don't like, I can list that whole complaints, but God, it is more than just a feeling. So I'm going to worship you and I want you to know how great you are. And this is what you've done for me. And you are amazing and you are mighty and you are powerful. And what I found is in those moments where I ignore the feelings of what is going on and instead press in and focus in on God, those are the times that true worship really begins to come out of me. I mean, that's kind of what true worship is. It's about forgetting about ourselves and lifting up, in this case, God. Ignoring those feelings that I have and just really pressing in to Him. And eventually what I find is a lot of times when I press in and when I say, okay, it's not about this song, it's not about the music, it's not about the singers. God, it's about you and I'm focusing on you. You are worthy. Eventually what I find is that is when I have the most intense times of worship because I'm ignoring myself and focusing on God. And eventually that feeling catches up. But if you're just chasing it down for the feeling, you're missing out. Because worship is more than just a feeling. Continuing in that thought process, though, worship is more than just about me. In fact, in the verse, he said, you act so superior, sticking your noses in the air. You act superior to me, God of the angel armies. Can I tell you the truth? When worship is all about me, then you're not really worshiping. In fact, if you're worshiping anything, you're really worshiping yourself. When it's about how I feel, or what I want, or what I show, or I need to raise my hand at this point because when our entire time of worshiping God is just talking about me and what I want and what I need and what I get and all that kind of stuff, we're not really worshiping God. It's a very hard thing, but one thing that I've tried sometimes is I've tried to make a mental note sometimes when I'm really trying to press into worship, not to mention I, me, or us, and instead just use words that really just focus on God. Talk to Him in ways that are more than just, God, I feel so alone right now, but I pray. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but something happens when I take the focus off of Josh and put it where it belongs, and that is God. Worship is not about us. Worship is about God and focusing on Him and getting our distraction off of ourselves and who is around us and what is going on about us. When we do that, when we remove all of those things, all of those distractions, and our focus is truly God, we find that we begin to engage with Him so much deeper, and the worship is so much more authentic. Worship is more than songs. And this is the big challenge, the big point. Worship is really a lifestyle. See, when God is directing this message to the people, the worship that they're talking about, He's not talking about, like raising your hands and singing these songs. When He's talking to them about the worship, He's talking about the animal sacrifices that they were doing. He was talking about the heart issue that was going on. That they could care less about Him, and their worship was lacking because they didn't have any holiness to it. They didn't have their hearts right in it. They were just doing it to get it done with. I think honestly, sometimes we've allowed music to influence us in more ways than we realize. I mean, when you talk to someone about worship, their immediate thing will be, well, it's these songs. I mean, for some of us, that is the only worship of God that we know, is what we do a half hour on a Sunday or maybe occasionally at a camp or something. But the truth is, worship is more than just songs. It is a lifestyle that we have to choose to live in. I mean, for me, I do engage great with music, and I'm sure a lot of us do and have. Like, worship music helps to press us in, and that is great. But it should be more than just on a Sunday morning with those couple of songs. It should be a lifestyle in the way that we live our life, when our actions are lived in a way, and the choices that we're making to say, okay, God, are you receiving glory in this? Is this bringing focus onto you? When we start looking for opportunities to not only spread God's love, but to say, okay, God, what are you doing and what can I be a part of? To sit there and say, hey, you know what? That person looks like they need help. I don't know who they are, but God, I want to honor you by helping them and directing them to you. Maybe it's by helping others. Maybe it's by keeping God first. Maybe it's by recognizing God throughout the day, outside of that norm of church services. But honestly, if we're going somewhere, being like, hey, God, I want you to guide me. I want the things that I say and the things that I do to honor you today. Maybe it's in your thoughts. See, with the priest, he was saying, you're putting on this good show, but inside I see your heart. And as a Christian, it can be very easy to put on a good show, and inside, my hearts and my thoughts are doing something completely different. I can sit in a worship service, believe me, I have growing up before, and I can raise my hand and I can be mouthing like, Jesus, I love you and everything like that. And inside, my focus is not on God, it's on the girl next to me. And my heart is on all sorts of things but God. What if we choose in our lifestyle of worship to honor God with our thoughts? The things that we think about. Okay, God, let me just think on the things of you. And I'm not talking about like a whole day of just meditating on God's things, but I'm talking about like when your thoughts start to wander, when you start to get angry, when you start to get upset, when you are bored, are you focusing on God? Are you turning that attention to God? When you're sitting there with someone and they're just boring you, are you saying, okay, let me get out of the situation? Or are you saying, hey, God, what can I do in this situation to shine you? I mean, there have been times where I have been bored throughout the day, throughout this whole thing, and I'm doing whatever, and I just say, okay, God, you know what? I just want to stop and thank you. When my thoughts start focusing on me, or they start looking depressive, or I just start feeling overwhelmed by the whole quarantine thing, I start saying, okay, God, I just thank you for who you are. I thank you for your love for me. I thank you for what you're doing. I try to retrain my thoughts to focus on God. See, worship is about a lifestyle, and it's about making those choices daily. It's more than just the song. It's more than just singing for a half hour on the weekend. It's really about engaging and focusing on God whenever I have the opportunity. Really letting my thoughts, my actions, my attitude reflect and honor God. whether it's on stage or in the privacy of my own house, whether it's an outward thing or whether it's in my thoughts. We should have our thoughts, our actions, our prayers, our lifestyles bring honor and glory to God. So the question I have for you guys today is, are we really worshiping God? As we've said, especially with this whole quarantine thing and being stuck at home all the time, or being so busy and hectic once our life gets back to normal, God has a habit of being put on the back burner. But are we doing that with our worship of him? Is our worship becoming more selfish or about a show, or more just about a song that we sing, or when we check off all the boxes of how worship has to be and then we can really engage God? Or are we just focusing on God wherever, whatever is going on, you are my focus because you deserve it all. God, you don't deserve the proposal in McDonald's. You deserve the best. And I want to worship and honor you for you being the best. We're having different people share their stories of what God has done in their life, or a way God has revealed himself in their life. And it's because sometimes we become so focused on everything else that we miss or forget how amazing and wonderful God is. The fact that he would love a sinner like me, the fact that he would care about me, that he would lay down everything for me. He deserves the best of my worship. Do we give him that? Or do we run the risk of him saying, your worship is lacking? Father, I pray that you would help us not to be lacking in worship, but that you would be our focus. God, I pray that you be with each and every student, that you would help us. If any of us are having issues with worship, if we are having issues with just having you be on the back burner, if it is more about the show and less about you, I pray that you would remind us that, and that you would help us to get our thoughts and our actions and our lifestyle back to the focus of you. Whether it needs to be worship to music in our house, or just in our prayers, or in the way that we live our life, I pray that you would receive the honor and glory that you deserve. That you remember how great and how awesome and mighty you are. I pray that we wouldn't find worship lacking, but that instead you would be honored and glorified by the way that we live our life for you. In your name, amen. All right, guys. As I say each and every week, and I mean it, I miss you guys. We love you guys. Melissa, myself, we're here for you if you ever need anything. We're a text, a phone call away. Don't hesitate. Reach out to us. We want to talk to you. We want to pray for you. On top of that, if you wore your pajamas to the video today, whenever you're watching this video, send it to me. I want to see you in your pajamas watching this video. All right. Love you guys, and can't wait to see you guys. Bye-bye.